Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. Dim the lights, stretch your neck a little, and pour a warm drink. You're going to need a clear head for this one. There is a strange feeling you get, like a soft sting behind the eyes, when someone looks at you and smiles. But something in your gut says they're not happy for you. You notice the compliment came too late. Their laugh felt just a little too sharp. And before you can name it, envy has already stepped into the room. You probably won't survive this week without these strategies. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from tonight. It always makes the world feel smaller when I know who's out there with me. Now, back to that sting. That's the moment envy pricks your skin. At first, it's subtle. You might brush it off. Maybe you tell yourself, they're just having a rough day. But something feels off. Maybe it's the way they bring up your good news in a weird tone around other people, or how they go quiet when you speak. Sometimes they even copy your ideas, but never say your name. It's envy. Not always the dramatic screaming kind. Sometimes it's soft and smooth like syrup, but it burns all the same. And here's the hard truth. Envy doesn't only show up in them. It lives in you too. You scroll through someone's win post online, and you pause just a second too long. You feel that tight twist in your chest, not because you hate them, but because something in their joy makes your own feel smaller. That's what Stoics called a sickness of the soul. Envy, jealousy, whatever name you prefer, it all boils down to this. A moment when you measure someone else's life against your own and come up short. Epictetus once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Envy is like that. It convinces you that you already understand someone else's life, and that what they have is better. It shuts down curiosity. And when curiosity dies, bitterness grows in its place. So what do you do in that moment? That first prick of envy, whether it's coming from you or towards you, you pause. You breathe. You name it. Because what you can name, you can handle. You don't have to judge it. Don't beat yourself up for feeling it. Just observe it like a curious scientist. Oh, look at that envy. Interesting. I must be feeling inadequate about something. And when it comes from others, the same rule applies. Name it without reacting. This is where most people go wrong. They either snap back with sarcasm, shrink themselves to avoid the jealousy, or start questioning their own success. None of that works. The Stoics would laugh gently at how often we contort ourselves for people who wouldn't to lift a finger for us. So you stop twisting. Imagine walking into a room full of mirrors. Some are clean, some are cracked, some are warped like a funhouse. And you're just trying to see your reflection clearly. Jealousy is like that warped mirror. It's not showing you, it's showing you someone else's broken lens. Why would you adjust your posture based on a warped reflection? Here's where the first layer of power comes in. Awareness. You see it. You name it. You don't take it personally. The moment you can do that, you stop the spiral before it starts. Now, here's a little modern moment to ground this. You get a text from a friend. They say, "Oh, I saw your new project. Looks interesting." You know the tone. You hear the unspoken jab. In the past, you might have panicked, started over-explaining, maybe even downplayed your work. But this time, you read the message. You breathe. You smile a little. And you reply with 2 words. "Thanks, friend." Not sarcastic, not icy. Just calm, controlled, unmoved. You've named the moment. And now you own it. That's what we'll be doing tonight. Taking back ownership of your peace. No flinching. No shrinking. No explaining. Just clear-eyed strength, rooted in ancient wisdom, lived out in everyday choices. Because envy can only win if it stays hidden. Once you see it, really see it, it loses its claws. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt envy flicker up in you, or saw it flash in someone else's eyes? And what did you do with that moment? Hold on to your answer. We'll need it as we keep going. You start noticing the look before the words. It's the way their smile pauses half a beat too long. The quick flick of their eyes when someone else compliments you. The way they repeat your idea a few days later, pretending it just popped into their head. Envy has a lot of faces, but it always wears a mask. The Stoics understood this long before social media ever existed. Seneca once said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." And that's the thing. Envy pretends to admire. It mimics closeness. But underneath, it's keeping score. You might think, well, they're my friend. They wouldn't be jealous of me. But friendship doesn't make anyone immune to the pull of comparison. In fact, it often intensifies it. Because the closer someone is to your life, the more they see what you have and what they think they deserve. Envy rarely shows up as direct hostility. That's too obvious. It prefers whispers, side glances, a sudden coldness wrapped in warm words. Think about it. You share something exciting, a new job, a finished book, a goal you've been chasing for months. They nod and say, "Wow, good for you." But you notice the tightness in their voice, the way their excitement doesn't quite reach their eyes. And later, they don't bring it up again. It's not hate. It's not anger. It's envy, hiding in plain sight. You can't confront it directly. That only makes the mask slip back into place. So what can you do? You learn to spot the signs early and clearly without getting hooked. Imagine envy like a fog that creeps in on quiet feet. If you panic and flail, you get turned around. But if you stay still, breathe deep, and recognize what's happening, you can walk right through it without losing your way. And let's be honest, sometimes you're the one wearing the mask. It happens when someone you know hits a milestone you haven't reached. Maybe they publish before you, get noticed before you, or seem to glow with effortless ease while you're still clawing your way forward. It's painful, not because you hate them, but because something inside whispers, "That should have been you." That voice is dangerous. It's not the real you. It's the version of you that forgot how far you've come. The version that measures self-worth using someone else's yardstick. You've got to catch that moment, because that's when the mask forms on your face. Not all envy is loud or bitter. Sometimes it comes wearing politeness. Sometimes it shows up as fake encouragement. Other times, it's just silence. The friend who always misses your big announcements. The coworker who gives praise to everyone except you. The sibling who changes the subject whenever your life starts shining a little too bright. Hear us the truth no one wants to say. A lot of people want you to do well, but not better than them. So how do you stay sane in a world full of smiling rivals? You stop needing them to approve of you. That's the Stoic move. You learn to walk into a room and stop scanning for reassurance. You stop playing small so others feel big. You stop diluting your joy because it might stir someone else's envy. Let them feel it. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. They can feel what they feel. You're not responsible for their reactions. You're responsible for your peace. And you keep your peace by seeing through the mask. Here's a modern moment to anchor this. You post something you're proud of. A project, a milestone, a quiet victory. You don't do it for praise. You do it to mark your growth. But hours pass, and one person, someone who always watches, doesn't say a word, doesn't like it, doesn't mention it. But you know they saw it. In the past, you'd wonder what you did wrong. You'd replay it in your head. Not anymore. Now you smile. You sip your drink. And you remember, some people only clap when they're on stage too. You see the mask. You don't yank it off. You just stop pretending it's not there. And that's when you start winning. Quietly, calmly, unbothered. So, let me ask you this. Who in your life always goes quiet when you shine? And what mask have you been pretending not to see? Because seeing it isn't cruel. It's kind. To you. You're not their mirror. That is the first truth you need to wrap your hands around like a cup of something warm after a long day. Because here's what happens. Someone throws you a look, makes a cutting remark, or just withdraws. And suddenly, you feel smaller. Like maybe you were too much. Maybe you should have stayed quiet. Maybe their discomfort is your fault. It's not. Their envy isn't about you. It's about the crack in their own reflection. Marcus Aurelius nailed it. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. None of them can hurt me. That last line? That's the money. None of them can hurt you unless you hand them the weapon. See, envy isn't just a feeling. It's a reaction to contrast. When your life starts to glow, it shines a light on their own darkness. When you move forward, it reminds them they're stuck. And rather than face that, they point at you. But here's where you win. You don't absorb it. You don't try to explain yourself. You don't make their discomfort your reflection. You're not their mirror. You are your own sky. Let them project what they want. It won't change the stars. Still, I get it. It's tempting to take it personally. Envy feels so targeted, so petty. Sometimes it is petty. You get passed over for a promotion, and the person who gets it avoids your eyes in the break room. Or you post a photo from your first trip in years, and that one friend, the one who's always just a little off, sends a dry, looks fun, and it stings. Not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't say. That's where self-trust has to kick in. Because if you're not careful, you start rewriting your story to fit their reaction. You start dulling your own edges so they don't feel scratched. But Stoicism asks something different. It asks, what if their discomfort isn't your cue to shrink, but your cue to stand calmly in your truth? What if you stopped apologizing for not matching someone else's insecurity? Now here's a story from the modern scroll of real life. You're in a group chat. You drop a message. Your Etsy shop just hit 1,000 sales. You're beaming. A few people reply with genuine fire emoji enthusiasm. But one person, the one who hasn't launched their own thing yet, types, "Must be nice." That's the envy flare. And what most people do in that moment? They pivot. Oh yeah, but it's not that big a deal. It was mostly luck. I barely slept last month. Stop. You don't owe anyone a discount version of your success. You don't have to be smaller to make someone else feel taller. That friend who says, "Must be nice," they're not asking for your humility. They're re-begging for you to collapse your joy so they don't have to confront their delay. But you're not their mirror. You don't reflect their fear. You radiate your own courage. Here's the twist. When you stop absorbing other people's envy, you stop fearing it. You start seeing it for what it really is, a signpost. A red flag waving above someone else's internal storm. And then something shifts. You stop managing people's feelings. You stop tiptoeing around your truth. You stop editing your story based on someone else's unfinished chapter. You start living without flinching. So the next time someone responds to your shine with shadow, remind yourself, their response is their business, not yours. Their jealousy isn't proof you did something wrong. It's proof you're doing something right. Which leads to this reflection. Whose approval have you been chasing? And what would it feel like to stop needing their applause to feel proud of yourself? That pause you just felt in your chest? That's the start of peace. You're not their mirror. So let them break their own reflection. You wrap your peace around you like a cloak, soft, invisible, impenetrable. Because if you're going to walk through a world laced with envy, you'll need something stronger than charm or explanations or good intentions. You need what the Stoics carried, the fireproof cloak. Now, it's not woven from threads or stitched by monks. You build it one quiet decision at a time. 1,000 small moments where you choose your center over their chaos. Epictetus said it clean and cold. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That one stings a bit, because it means envy only burns you if you hand it kindling. The cloak? It's what you wear when you stop being flammable. You start by letting go of the fantasy that you can explain envy away. That if you're just nice enough, humble enough, quiet enough, they'll stop feeling weird around your wins. They won't. That's not your job. Your job is to keep walking. Let me give you a real one. You're at a family gathering. You mention casually that your side hustle is finally pulling in some steady income. You don't brag, you just share. And your cousin, who's been circling the same job for a decade, chimes in with, "Hope it's not another one of those online pyramid things." Everyone laughs. You feel your ears get hot. You want to correct them. Defend yourself. Prove your work is legit. But this time you don't. You sip your drink. You nod. You let the moment pass like smoke through a screen. That's the cloak. It has the discipline of not needing to win the moment, because you've already won in silence. And here is the funny thing about this kind of strength. It doesn't look like strength to others. It just looks like calm. And that drives some people crazy. They want you flustered. They want you to react, to fight, to explain. They want to poke a hole in your peace. But the cloak doesn't tear. It's not arrogance. It's awareness. You see what's happening, and you choose not to participate. And over time, this cloak becomes a habit. Someone makes a sideways comment, you smile like you didn't hear it. Someone tries to compete with your good news, you congratulate them first. Someone goes cold after you shine, you let the chill pass without reaching for a coat. You're not cold. You're not hard. You're just fireproof. That doesn't mean you don't feel the heat. Of course you do. You're human. You'll still get that flush of awkwardness, that sharp edge of pain when someone dims their light in your presence. But you don't act on it. That's the Stoic flex. It's not about becoming emotionless. It's about being unmoved. And here's a wild realization. When you wear the cloak, other people's envy becomes kind of boring. You recognize it faster. You don't get hooked. You see the same patterns play out, and instead of feeling rattled, you feel something else. Pity. Not in a superior way, but in a "I've been there" way. Because envy is a prison, and you're finally outside the bars. One more moment from the modern scroll. You're in a Slack group for creators. Someone notices your launch numbers and says, "Whoa, look at you blowing up. Guess some people get lucky." You pause. You want to say, "It wasn't luck. I worked for this. I bled for this." But you don't. You type, "Thanks. Hope things are going well for you too." And you mean it. That's not weakness. That's someone who's no longer catching and releasing other people's projections. That's someone who's wearing the fireproof cloak. So here's your moment of reflection tonight. What if every envious comment was actually an invitation to build your cloak thicker, quieter, stronger? Would you still take it personally? Or would you start weaving? Why do they want you to flinch? Why does your calm make them fidget? Why does your silence make them talk louder? Why does your steady growth done without theatrics or hashtags bother them so much? Because envy isn't just about wanting what you have. It's about wanting you to doubt that you deserve it. See, some people don't just envy your progress. They envy your peace. They don't want your job, your followers, your book deal. They want the look in your eyes that says, "I no longer need permission." And that unsettles them more than anything. Marcus Aurelius had a way of slicing through this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Now picture this. You're in a meeting. You share an idea. It's clear. It's sharp. It lands. Someone across the table, who's always just a touch too competitive, interrupts with a smirk and says, "That's ambitious. Not sure it'll work in the real world, though." Everyone glances around. And you? You don't flinch. You just turn slightly, meet their eyes not to challenge, just to witness and say, "Let's see." You drop it there. No defense, no counterattack, just unshaken confidence. That right there is what rattles them. Because the envious don't always want to destroy your joy. That's too obvious. They want to dent it. They want to be the shadow in your sunny day, the whisper in your good news, the pause in your celebration. And they want you to notice them, to twist, to doubt, to react. Why? Because when someone is wrestling with inner chaos, your stillness reminds them that peace is possible, and that's unbearable to someone who hasn't chosen it. Envy feeds on drama, on reaction, on performance. So when you don't flinch, when you don't clap back or explain yourself, when you just sit there and own your space, it short-circuits them. They don't know where to go with all that energy. Here is another quiet jab you might have felt. You tell someone you're retaking a break from social media. They grin and say, "Oh yeah, must be nice to have the time for that." It's not a question. It's a prod. A poke at your right to rest. Because deep down, they're not asking how you did it. They're asking how you had the nerve. The nerve to unplug, to protect your peace, to opt out of the competition. To them, that's a kind of betrayal. But you didn't betray anyone. You just stopped flinching. There's a moment somewhere deep in the Stoic practice where you realize your greatest weapon is your absence. Not ghosting, not running, not cutting people off. Just not giving your energy to every poke. You become like a mountain. They shout at you, and the echo swallows the sound before it even reaches your ears. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. So what happens next? Well, some of them escalate. They up the sarcasm, the gossip, the little digs. They throw bigger stones. And you? You still don't flinch. That's when they crack. Because the game only works when you play it. And this isn't about pretending you're better than anyone. It's about protecting your mental ecosystem from someone else's storm. It's about saying, "I won't flinch to make you feel taller." You can't control who envies you, but you can control how much space it gets in your day. Here's something from the now. You're celebrating a small win, a new client, a good review. You post about it. Clean, honest, no bragging. Someone responds with, "Wow, another one. What's your secret? That laugh emoji?" It's doing all the heavy lifting. You could tell them your process. You could open up about the years it took to get here. You could explain how it wasn't overnight. But instead, you reply with a wink. Consistency. And then nothing else. You're not being coy. You're just not flinching. You're not rewarding envy with explanation. And here's a thought that might sting a bit, but stay with me. Maybe you've been flinching out of habit, not necessity. Because somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that success should be softened, that confidence should come with disclaimers, that joy should be distributed evenly. But what if it doesn't? What if your calm is the most generous thing you offer? Because it shows others what's possible. And maybe, just maybe, one of those envious eyes will blink, look inward, and realize they could have that too. But only if you stop flinching long enough to model it. So here's your reflection. When was the last time someone tried to provoke you, and you gave them what they wanted? What would it look like to give them nothing next time? Try it. You might be surprised how powerful peace can be. Cutting the cord doesn't always look like scissors. Sometimes it's quieter than that. No dramatic confrontation. No final message. Just a gentle, steady shift in how much access someone has to your energy. When envy keeps showing up in the same eyes, the same tone, the same patterns, you know what time it is. It's time to cut the cord. Not because you're angry, because you're done. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual." Notice what he didn't say? He didn't just say tolerate the ones who drain you just because they've known you the longest. That's the old conditioning. Stay loyal, stay close, stay polite, even if it poisons your peace. Not anymore. You start to notice the little ways it shows up. They only call when they need to vent, never when you're winning. They always have a backhanded compliment in their pocket. Look at you, getting all fancy. Don't forget us, little people. You try to brush it off, give them grace. And maybe that worked for a while. But lately, it feels heavier. Their words land harder. Their silence feels colder. You leave every interaction feeling smaller. So what do? You don't fight them. You don't write a monologue. You don't draft a 17-paragraph text explaining your feelings. You just start moving differently. That's what real cord cutting looks like. It's subtle, intentional, clean. Maybe you stop sharing your wins with them. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. You stop inviting them into spaces they've never protected. Maybe you mute their updates. Maybe you respond slower. Maybe you stop initiating. You don't make a scene. You just reclaim your space. Because the longer you stay tied to someone who can't celebrate you, the more you start shrinking in places where you should be expanding. And listen, this isn't about surrounding yourself with yes people. It's about surrounding yourself with clear people. People who don't flinch when you grow. People who don't mistake your joy for arrogance. People who clap when you win, even if they haven't won yet. But what if the person you need to pull away from is family? Or an old friend? That's the hardest cut of all. Because you're not just walking away from them. You're walking away from a version of yourself that used to need their validation. Here's a familiar moment. You launch something new. You feel that flutter in your chest, the good kind. You think, maybe this time they'll be proud. But instead, they respond with silence, or worse, a dig. And in that moment, something breaks. Good. That crack is where the light gets in. That's the place where you start to untangle. You start seeing them clearly not as villains, but as people still caught in their own loops. People who haven't yet figured out how to clap without resentment. And you stop waiting. You stop waiting for them to change, for them to finally see you. You see yourself. And from that place of clarity, you move. You build new rhythms, new rituals, new circles. You find the ones who cheer out loud, and you become that person for others too. Here's something that hits close. You used to downplay your goals around them. You used to say, "Oh, it's just a little side project," when really, it was your heart on the line. But now, you say it plainly, proudly. You don't shrink. You don't explain. And if they can't handle that, they don't get access to it. That's not cold. That's clean. That's stoic boundary work. Because the ultimate boundary isn't blocking someone. It's building a life so aligned, they just drift. So here's your reflection. Who are you still shrinking around? And what would it feel like to move without explaining, without defending, just calmly stepping into your full self? The cord doesn't have to snap. It just has to be released. Cutting the cord doesn't always look like scissors. Sometimes it's quieter than that. No dramatic confrontation. No final message. Just a gentle, steady shift in how much access someone has to your energy. When envy keeps showing up in the same eyes, the same tone, the same patterns, you know what time it is. It's time to cut the cord. Not because you're angry, because you're done. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual." Notice what he didn't say? He didn't just say tolerate the ones who drain you just because they've known you the longest. That's the old conditioning. Stay loyal, stay close, stay polite, even if it poisons your peace. Not anymore. You start to notice the little ways it shows up. They only call when they need to vent, never when you're winning. They always have a backhanded compliment in their pocket. Look at you, getting all fancy. Don't forget us, little people. You try to brush it off, give them grace. And maybe that worked for a while. But lately, it feels heavier. Their words land harder. Their silence feels colder. You leave every interaction feeling smaller. So what do? You don't fight them. You don't write a monologue. You don't draft a 17-paragraph text explaining your feelings. You just start moving differently. That's what real cord cutting looks like. It's subtle, intentional, clean. Maybe you stop sharing your wins with them. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. You stop inviting them into spaces they've never protected. Maybe you mute their updates. Maybe you respond slower. Maybe you stop initiating. You don't make a scene. You just reclaim your space. Because the longer you stay tied to someone who can't celebrate you, the more you start shrinking in places where you should be expanding. And listen, this isn't about surrounding yourself with yes people. It's about surrounding yourself with clear people. People who don't flinch when you grow. People who don't mistake your joy for arrogance. People who clap when you win, even if they haven't won yet. But what if the person you need to pull away from is family? Or an old friend? That's the hardest cut of all. Because you're not just walking away from them. You're walking away from a version of yourself that used to need their validation. Here's a familiar moment. You launch something new. You feel that flutter in your chest, the good kind. You think, maybe this time they'll be proud. But instead, they respond with silence. Or worse, a dig. And in that moment, something breaks. Good. That crack is where the light gets in. That's the place where you start to untangle. You start seeing them clearly not as villains, but as people still caught in their own loops. People who haven't yet figured out how to clap without resentment. And you stop waiting. You stop waiting for them to change, for them to finally see you. You see yourself. And from that place of clarity, you move. You build new rhythms, new rituals, new circles. You find the ones who cheer out loud, and you become that person for others too. Here's something that hits close. You used to downplay your goals around them. You used to say, "Oh, it's just a little side project," when really, it was your heart on the line. But now, you say it plainly, proudly. You don't shrink. You don't explain. And if they can't handle that, they don't get access to it. That's not cold. That's clean. That's stoic boundary work. Because the ultimate boundary isn't blocking someone. It's building a life so aligned, they just drift. So here's your reflection. Who are you still shrinking around? And what would it feel like to move without explaining, without defending, just calmly stepping into your full self? The cord doesn't have to snap. It just has to be released. Strength isn't always loud. In fact, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds legacy and peace, it usually isn't. It's the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't stomp into the room, doesn't feel the need to correct every misstep or clap back at every sideways glance. Real strength looks like not reacting when everything in you wants to. It's the quiet breath you take instead of the sarcastic retort. It's the way you let the passive-aggressive comment roll off like rain on oiled skin. It is the moment you decide, I could wreck them with one sentence, but I won. That's stoic power. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. And it holds. Every time someone tries to rattle you with jealousy, masked as critique, or envy disguised as backhanded praise, every time they want to make you feel small, you choose stillness. You choose not to respond the way they would. That's how you win. Now imagine this. You're catching up with an old friend, the kind who always seems to need you to be struggling a little. You tell them about your recent success. Maybe your coloring book series is finally gaining traction on Amazon. It's been slow, but it's building. They lean back, raise an eyebrow, and go, people still buy those? It's a classic. You feel the flicker rise. You could easily fire back with stats, with screenshots, with proof. But instead, you smile, tilt your head a bit, and say, yep, still going. You don't elaborate. You don't defend. You just sit in your truth, because your life isn't a debate stage. And their envy? That's their business to resolve, not yours to absorb. Quiet strength is unsettling to people used to chaos. It makes them twitch, because they're used to provoking emotion. They're used to energy spiraling in response. They're used to winning arguments, not being met with stillness. You, however, aren't in the argument. You've moved on. Here's a real twist. Sometimes silence is louder than any clapback. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing, just that subtle smirk that says, I know what this is, and I'm not playing. You see this often in subtle online dynamics. Let's say someone throws shade on your work in a vague post. No names, but the reference is clear. They want you to react. They want to be seen. They want your time. But instead of messaging them, instead of posting your own version of I see you just go back to work. You respond with your results. You build. You ship. You publish. And most importantly, you rest. That right there, that's strength. It's not glamorous. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't come with a round of applause, but it brings peace that isn't borrowed. It rewires your nervous system. It teaches you that you don't have to match energy. You can preserve yours instead. And that might be the most stoic skill of all, holding your own energy in a room that wants to take it from you. It's noticing the digs, the passive remarks, the awkward silences, and thinking, oh, I see. They're uncomfortable. That has nothing to do with me. And letting it pass. Like a bird overhead, like a breeze that doesn't touch the ground. No flinch, no flurry, just quiet observation. Now, here is the joke that lives inside all of this. People will often interpret your silence as weakness, right, until they realize it as restraint. They'll push. They'll prod. They'll assume you're afraid to speak. But eventually, they realize you just don't need to. You've got better things to do. So here's your moment to reflect. Where have you been wasting strength trying to be heard, when you could have been powerful just being still? Because not every jab deserves a block. Not every comment needs a comeback. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes with growing. No one really talks about it. We talk about wins. We talk about glow-ups and breakthroughs and milestones. But no one really prepares you for the moment you look around and realize you don't quite fit where you used to, not because you're better, but because you're different now. The rooms you once tiptoed into, you now walk through with purpose. The conversations you once craved, they feel small, not wrong, just distant, like old clothes that don't sit on your skin the way they used to. This is what growth feels like when it gets quiet. And oddly enough, this is often when envy starts knocking the loudest. Epictetus had a line for this too. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Because the moment you shift, even slightly, there's a part of the world that starts resisting. Not the whole world. Just the part that liked you better before you were this free. Here's the moment you'll recognize. You're doing something new. Building a project. Taking your peace seriously. You've turned down gossip, stepped back from chaos, stopped responding to every emotional bat signal. You're less available, but more you than ever. And someone notices. They don't say it outright. They don't need to. They just withdraw a little. Or they tease. Or they mention how you've changed, but not like it's a good thing. They miss the old version of you, the one who doubted, the one who kept dimming themselves to keep the mood balanced. But you don't live there anymore. So yeah, maybe you're not getting invited to every hangout now. Maybe some people don't call as often. Maybe the group chat's gone a little colder. That's okay. You're not being punished. You're being shifted. Growth isn't always claps and confetti. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's people pulling away, not because you hurt them, but because your progress holds up a mirror they're not ready to look into. And envy? Envy thrives in that space between familiarity and discomfort. They know you. They've seen you low. And now you're moving? Now you're what rising? That unsettles people more than they'll ever admit. Especially if they're still in the same spot. Especially if they told themselves, we're all struggling together. But now you're not. So what do? You resist the urge to shrink back down just to be liked again. That's key. You don't owe anyone the version of you that kept you stuck. And here's something to really sit with. Your growth will cost you something, but it should never cost you yourself. You don't abandon your light just because it casts shadows behind you. That is what you have to remember in the quiet hours, when you re-tempted to apologize for outgrowing certain dynamics. You haven't done anything wrong. You've just outgrown the places where envy felt normal, where small talk and side eyes were disguised as community. And now you're rebuilding, one clear connection at a time, one honest laugh at a time, one day of peace at a time. And sure, it might be lonelier at first, but eventually, you look around and realize you're re-surrounded by people who don't need you to be smaller to love you well. People who aren't threatened by your focus. People who don't flinch when you rise. They might not have been in the original cast, but they're part of the new script. So here's your moment to reflect tonight. What relationships feel colder not because you failed them, but because you stopped failing yourself? And what would it look like to bless that distance instead of chasing their warmth? Let the room shift. You're still standing. Not every critic is your enemy, but not every friend is your ally either. This is one of those lessons that only clicks after a few bruises, after enough helpful advice that actually left you doubting yourself, after enough forced smiles from people who quietly resented your progress. You start noticing the gap, the one between what they say and how they say it, between their words and their energy, between their congrats and their contempt. And here is where it gets interesting. The people who envy you the most often don to look like haters. They look like cheerleaders. They sound like mentors. They move like supporters. Until they don't. Until your light gets a little too steady and they need to remind you where the switch is. Marcus Aurelius, that calm observer of human nature, gave us this. The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. Translation? Not everyone as feedback deserves a seat at your table, especially if they've never built anything themselves. Now let's ground this. Imagine you finally launched your own digital product. Maybe it's your third. You've put in the hours. You know it's solid. A friend who's never shipped anything but always has opinions says, looks cool. Just be careful not to flood the market. You know how fast things get saturated. You nod. You say thanks. But inside, you feel that quiet gut drop. That wasn't concern. That was containment. They want you cautious, not confident. They want you hesitant, not honest. And more than anything, they want you close. Close to them, close to their pace. Close to the version of you that second guesses everything. Because your momentum makes their delay uncomfortable. That is the undercurrent of envy we rarely name. The discomfort someone feels when you make different choices than they would, and those choices work. It's not about whether they like you. It's about whether your success invalidates their excuses. And that kind of envy? It's dressed like care. Just worried about you burning out. Are you sure you're not rushing this? Don't let it go to your head. They don't come with daggers. They come with soft, reasonable ropes. And if you're not careful, you start tying them around your own ankles. That's why you've got to get clear on this. Affection doesn't equal alignment. You can love someone deeply and still know they're not safe with your dreams. You can respect someone's story and still recognize their advice is rooted in fear. You can hold space for someone's past while refusing to carry their limitations forward. And this doesn't mean you cut everyone off. It means you filter. You run every piece of feedback through a quiet question. Does this come from someone who has been where I'm going? Or someone who is afraid I'll get there first? That single reflection will save you years of detours. It'll keep you from pausing projects just to appease someone else's nervous system. It'll help you build with clarity, not permission. Now here's a practical tool, nothing fancy, just a mental framework. Before you absorb someone's opinion, ask yourself, do I want their life? Do I trust their values? Do they benefit when I stay small? If the answer is no to even one of those, then smile, nod, and discard. Not out of arrogance, out of alignment. And one more thing, don't argue with them. Don't try to prove you've thought this through. Don't waste breath trying to teach someone who already knows they're being undermining. Just keep building. Let your work speak. Let your results ripple. Let your peace prove the point. So here's your reflection for tonight. Whose concern has been slowly clipping your wings? And what would it look like to say, thank you, and fly anyway? Not out of spite, out of self-respect. You don't owe them a version of you they're comfortable with. That's the core of it. Because the longer you live trying to stay likable, the more you dilute what actually makes you powerful. Envy, at its core, isn't about you being too much. It's about you no longer being containable. It's about you becoming something they can't predict, can't manage, can't shape with a subtle glare or a guilt-laced sigh. Seneca said, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." And nothing tests that power like staying centered while people tug at your edges. Here's a moment you might know too well. You walk into a room or join a call and feel the tone shift. It's subtle, not cruel, not open hostility, just restraint. Like everyone's waiting to see which version of you shows up. Will you brag? Will you apologize? Will you make yourself palatable again? It's exhausting. Like auditioning for a role you didn't ask to play. But here's where it shifts. You stop auditioning. You stop shape-shifting into versions of yourself that make other people feel safer. Not reckless. Not performative. Just honest. You say what's true. You name what's real. You let the tension exist without rushing to soothe it. Because here is the quiet tragedy no one tells you. When you water yourself down to keep the peace, you end up resenting everyone who drank from the diluted version of you. You start shrinking your own joy preemptively, just to avoid those weird pauses. You pre-edit your wins. You add disclaimers to your excitement. You make sure to throw in a, but I'm still figuring things out, even when you actually crushing it. You do all this just to avoid the cold shoulder, the forced smile, the must-be-nice bomb. But what if you didn't? What if you just let them feel what they feel? Because here's the wild twist. When you stop needing to be understood, envy starts to lose its grip. You don't need them to clap. You don't need them to validate your decisions. You don't even need them to like you. You just need to be free. Here's a relatable one. You post something you're proud of. Your first $1,000 month. A product that finally landed. A book that hit the charts. Most of your circle celebrates you. But there's that one person who goes quiet. No comment, no message, just silence. And you notice. You always notice. But this time, you don't rush to fix it. You don't send a casual follow-up. You don't to drop a hope everything is okay, just to pull them back into connection. You let them sit in it. Not out of punishment, but because you no longer doing emotional contortion to make someone else feel okay about not showing up for you. That's what owning your space looks like. It's not loud. It's not cruel. It's clean. It's knowing you can be kind without being accommodating. It's knowing you can be warm without being editable. And it's realizing not everyone deserves the most unfiltered version of you. Some people only like the version that needed their approval. And when that version fades, so do they. Let them. Let the discomfort rise and pass. Let the silence teach you. Let your life speak louder than their avoidance. And most importantly, don't go back to small just to make the room feel familiar. You've grown. Stay there. So tonight, ask yourself this. Where have you been dimming your joy? Not because you're ashamed, but because you knew it would make someone else uncomfortable? And what would it feel like to shine anyway? Sometimes they don't say anything. No side eye. No sarcastic jab. No cold silence. Just a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. And that, somehow, feels worse. Because at least the open critics are honest. At least the loud ones are easy to spot. But the quiet ones? The ones who used to support you, who still show up, who still seem to be in your corner, they're trickier. Their envy is wrapped in politeness. They never directly knock your work. They just don't touch it anymore. They used to comment. Now they just view. They used to reply. Now they leave you on read. And you catch yourself wondering, did I do something wrong? Marcus Aurelius might whisper across centuries. When someone does wrong, it is because they are mistaken about what is good. Their silence isn't about you. It's about how your progress made them question their own. And maybe they're not ready to face that. You used to be equals, hustling together, dreaming together, struggling side by side. But then you moved. And they didn't. And even if you never made it a competition, something in them decided to keep score. Here's what happens in those moments. You want to shrink the win. You want to message them and say, hey, it's not as big of a deal as it looks. You want to throw in a still figuring it out, though, just to smooth things over. But you don't. You resist. Because shrinking your joy for someone else's comfort is the slowest form of self-abandonment. You're not obligated to explain your momentum. You're not required to soften the beauty of your blooming just because someone else is still in seed stage. And here's the wild part. Real friends, real allies, they don't need the full story to celebrate with you. They see your light and they reflect it back. They ask how you did it, not to copy, but to clap. But these quiet envy holders, they stop asking. They stop seeing. They go radio silent when you rise, but text you instantly when you fall. You post a win? Crickets? You post a frustration? Hey, just checking in. Funny, isn't it? It's not support. It's surveillance. They're not here to cheer you on. They're here to make sure you don't get too far ahead. So what do? You notice it. You name it internally. You don't confront. You don't perform. You just adjust. You start sharing less in that direction. You redirect your joy toward people who meet it with ease, not calculation. You keep building without that weird pressure to manage their emotions around your success. Because here's a tough truth. If they can't handle your shine, they were never your safe place to begin with. And you don't need their permission to keep glowing. One more moment that might hit close. Someone reaches out of the blue. You're excited. You think they're reconnecting. But after a few polite lines, you realize they're just trying to see how far you've gone. They're not catching up. They're checking in like a scout, measuring your reach. You feel it in your gut. And this time, instead of oversharing or bending backward to seem humble, you give them what's true and nothing more. You don't hide, but you don't hand them everything either. You preserve the sacred, because not everyone gets the full broadcast. Some people only deserve the trailer. So here's your reflection. Who do you still feel the need to downplay your joy around? And what would it look like to stop doing that, even if it means letting the silence stay silent? The ones meant for you will meet your eyes with warmth. Let the rest keep watching. They don't hate you. They hate the mirror. The one you didn't even know you were holding up. You were just doing your thing, slowly building, staying consistent, reclaiming your peace, owning your momentum, and somehow that became a problem. Not because you hurt anyone, but because your progress reminded someone else that they're still standing still. That's how envy often starts, quietly, in someone else's shadow, not yours. They see your calm, and it stirs their chaos. They see your choices, and it highlights their avoidance. They see your energy, and it exposes their excuses. Seneca once said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." But what if you are the friction? Not because you're abrasive, but because you're clear. You walk in alignment, and suddenly everyone who's misaligned starts itching. Not because you judge them, but because now they have to judge themselves. That's the mirror. You didn't ask to hold it up. You didn't raise your hand and say, "Hey, let me be your existential crisis." But it happens. Especially when your peace starts looking like rebellion in a world addicted to noise. Let's ground it in a real one. You're keeping your head down, working on your digital art prompts, or your fifth low-content book. You've found your rhythm, and for once, it doesn't feel chaotic. You mention it to a friend who has been thinking about starting something for 2 years. And suddenly, they shift. They make a joke. They start picking apart what you do. That art stuff isn't real creativity anyway. Coloring books? You still doing that kid stuff? They laugh, but it lands like a slap, because it's not about you. It's about the mirror. You showed them it's possible to start. That scares them. People resent proof more than they resent failure. They hate when you make effort look doable. It shatters their comfort zone. It challenges their delay. It says, you could have moved too. You just didn't. That's when the envy really kicks in. And here's the trick. Your instinct might still be to soften the mirror, to dim your joy, to share your struggles more than your wins, just to make the reflection less sharp. But don't. You're not responsible for how others process their reflection. You're only responsible for holding it cleanly, without apology. Not weaponized, not theatrical, just real. Because your light is not an insult. Your momentum isn't a threat. Your growth isn't a flex, it's a choice. One they could make, too. And sometimes they will. That's the other side of the mirror. People who once envied you may someday thank you. But not if you keep hiding. Not if you keep apologizing for showing up. So keep showing up. Let them see it. Let them wrestle. Let the mirror do its work. And if they walk away, let them. Not everyone is ready to look themselves in the eye. But the ones who are, they'll come back stronger. They'll say, "I've been watching. You showed me it was possible." And you'll smile. Not smug, just proud. Because you didn't shrink. You stood still long enough to reflect something true. So tonight, ask yourself, where are you still trying to hide the mirror? And what would happen if you just let them see it? You're not the problem. You're just the proof. There's power in not correcting the record. When envy rises, your instinct might be to explain yourself, to clear the air, to reassure, to make sure no one misunderstands your heart. But here's the truth. People committed to misunderstanding, you will never run out of reasons. So you stop wasting energy clarifying things to those who've already made up their minds. Marcus Aurelius said it best. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Translation: don't defend your character. Live it. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them spin their version. You've got a whole life to live, and their false narrative doesn't belong in the plot. Here's a moment that might sound familiar. Someone hears about your latest project. Maybe your digital downloads are finally selling. Maybe your email list is waking back up. Maybe your stuff is finally working. But instead of saying, "I'm happy for you," they say, "Must be nice." I guess it's easier when you have time, money, connections, luck. You freeze. You want to say, I worked for this. You want to explain the sleepless nights, the risks, the strategy, the failures they never saw. But you don't. Not because you're passive, but because you've stopped needing their approval. Because now you understand. Their envy is a projection, not a prophecy. You don't owe them your backstory. You don't have to unpack every sacrifice just to justify your joy. That's the beauty of growth. At some point, you stop asking to be understood and start being okay with being seen. Even if they're looking through a cracked lens. Even if they get it wrong. Because here is the secret. The people who matter don't need you to explain your whole journey. They feel the truth in how you carry yourself. They see it in your tone, in your consistency, in your peace. They know the difference between a show-off and someone who's finally walking with clarity. And the others? Let them talk. Let them twist the facts. Let them screenshot, whisper, speculate. You're not in that room anymore. You're not editing your story to fit their comfort zone. You're building. You're resting. You're showing up in ways they stopped believing were possible. That's threat enough. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. When people start talking behind your back and you know exactly what they're saying. But this is where stillness becomes your superpower. You choose not to chase, not to post that just to clarify thread, not to send the "I heard what you said" text. You sit in your center. You say less, and let your results narrate the truth. Because nothing breaks envy's teeth like quiet confidence, like not even flinching when your name's in someone else's mouth. You just keep moving forward. And here's the best part. The ones who see through the noise, they'll find you. They'll feel your steadiness and know it's real. Not because you defended yourself, but because you didn't have to. So here's your reflection tonight. Where are you still trying to prove your worth? And what would it feel like to stop explaining and just embody it instead? No reframe, no rebuttal, just presence. Let the record stay imperfect. You've got better things to write. You don't need closure to move on. That's the final piece. The most frustrating, the most freeing. Because for all the mind games envy plays, for all the weird silence and fake smiles and cryptic shade, it almost never comes with a confession. You rarely get the text that says, "Hey, I've been cold because I'm jealous." You don't get the apology that names the truth. What you get is distance. An unspoken shift. A slow dissolve of connection. And your mind wants to solve it. Close the loop. Understand why someone who used to root for you now avoids eye contact. But Stoicism teaches us to let go of the outcome. To stop needing every loop tied with a bow. Epictetus once more holds the line. When someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. So tonight, we stop chasing closure from people who don't have the courage to give it. You stop writing their apology for them in your head. You stop crafting what you'll say when they finally admit what this was all about. Because envy rarely ends with a bang. It ends with a fade. A half-hearted birthday message. A like without a comment. A conversation that never quite reappears. And you learn to bless that, even when it stings. You learn that closure isn't something they give you. It's something you decide. You close the door quietly, not bitter, not triumphant, just done. You let the weight fall off your shoulders. You stop carrying their unspoken issues like it's your job to fix them. And here's the gift hidden inside that silence. Space. Space to recalibrate, to stop hyper-watching reactions, to stop filtering your joy, to stop explaining your glow, to stop waiting for approval before taking your next step. Because once you stop trying to fix the vibe, you start to feel your own again. The envy clears, not because they change, but because you stop orbiting their emotional weather. You return to your work, to your breath, to your strange little dreams that don't need permission to exist. And slowly, you build a life that doesn't bend at every strange look. You build a heart that doesn't stutter when someone withdraws. You build boundaries that are silent, but sacred. That's Stoic living. Not cold, just clean. So here's the final reflection of the night. Whose silence have you been trying to decode? And what would it feel like to stop needing a reason to walk forward freely? They don't owe you clarity, but you owe yourself peace. And sometimes that's the same thing. Now you breathe a little slower. You feel the weight shift from your shoulders to the floor. No more deciphering half-meanings. No more reading between the lines of someone else's silence. You've done enough. Tonight, let their envy dissolve like fog in morning light. Let it go, not because it didn't hurt, but because you're tired of carrying what was never yours. Your worth isn't tied to their reaction. Your glow doesn't need their nod. What you've built in quiet hours, what you're still building, it's already enough. You don't need to dim it to stay safe. You don't need to explain it to be real. You just need to rest. Let your nervous system soften. Let your heart come home. Because the truth is, envy can't touch someone who is content within. It can swirl, it can whisper, but it can't land. And you've outgrown their reach. So turn off your need to be understood. Let that be tonight's act of rebellion. And sleep like someone who finally knows you are not a threat. You're just no longer willing to be small.